So what percentage of your colleagues' knowledge base outside of what they learned in school comes from experience of using, and how does that enhance your recommendation or doesn't? I had a vegan cat that was cooking barbecue, and I was like, you can't, how does a vegan person do ribs? And I was like, nah, and it reminded me of like the dealer that didn't smoke, and I was like, no, dude, I don't trust that if you don't, but
Randy, you bring up a great point, because in that pilot study that Jahan and I did on mental health clinicians, we found that those who had more bias and fear against recommending, or whatever you want to call it, for cannabis were those who had never tried it before. Those who had used cannabis in the past actually were more apt to feel like, this is very therapeutic. This can be helpful for this condition.
And Randy, to your point, it actually, physicians and pharmacists and pharmacologists used to take the drugs they would prescribe to people. That was part of it. And it was a practice up until like the 70s. Yes. They used to tell stories at Temple, like, oh yeah, when they were making new opiates, it usually resulted in someone taking it and then being doubled over the sink. Right. But now they've passed, laws and regulations to prevent that.
But that's how Raphael Mechoulam, isn't that kind of, they got into it? They were using some of that.
That is the legend, is that when it came down to determining, is this compound A THC or is compound B THC, his wife made it into, baklava or whatever, and as guests arrive, they gave them either A or B, and 30 minutes later, they knew what the active ingredient in THC was.
Right.
Isn't that amazing?
Mm-hmm. It's interesting to think about. I mean, obviously, in New York, the only way any of our clinicians would have experience is if they have a medical recommendation for it. But I think that kind of brings us back to that pharmacological training, right? Like, if you have rheumatoid arthritis, I don't have to inject your medication to know how it's going to affect you and be able to counsel you on the side effects and the outcomes and things like that. So having a really, really thorough and deep understanding of how things work in the brain allows us to be able to give recommendation without necessarily having experienced it. Right. And that's a big differentiator, I think.
I guess I was asking, again, just to use a culinary world, could you describe the differences between taste and lettuce if you never tasted them, or herbs?
I mean, not necessarily, but I don't know that
it's critical in your
same,
recommendation.
Actually, I would say it's probably the result of your field. I mean, like you said, your job is to think of the chemical formulation and how do I treat this condition, not so much what is the experience of it. Does that make sense?
It does. That adds clarity.
See, that would be for me, just because I'm so interested and work with people and their perceptions and how things affect them cognitively, emotionally, and all that. I am looking at it from that perspective.
But to Randy's analogy, would you trust someone on their recommendation to put hot sauce on your burrito if they had never had hot sauce before? Be like, how's the hot sauce? Should I put that pico de gallo on there? You want someone maybe who's experienced with chili peppers to be like, oh yeah, you'll burn your mouth. Don't.
We're not asking you to come out of the closet, Stacia.
No. I mean, it's for me, it's a fascinating conversation because I look at things medically, and so to my mind, when the doctor says, you have high blood pressure, need to take this, I wouldn't respond with, well, have you taken it? Did it lower your blood pressure? It's like, no, we have science and evidence that shows why, right?